Hello and welcome to the second webinar of the Conscious Accra chapter event, part of the Conscious Cities Festival 2020. My name is Amowi Phillips and I am the co-convener of Conscious Accra, as well as the facilitator for this conversation about our urban natural heritage, with the provocative title, Is Accra a Green City? Here to help answer this question are some passionate advocates and champions of public and green space, as well as the overall environmental health of Accra. And as I count myself amongst them, I will start off a round of introductions with myself. My professional life has been in the fields of law and of academia, as well as civil society. I currently hold an adjunct professor position in the United States. And of particular relevance to this webinar, I am a board member, international representative, and projects team leader with Mofra Foundation, which is an Accra-based social enterprise and a partner of the Conscious Accra event. Most recently, I'm leading a team to evaluate formal and informal park spaces in the city. So I now will turn to inviting our guests to give a brief introduction of themselves. Tell us a little bit about how you and your organization are associated with matters relating to the environment in Accra. And let us begin with Esther.
Yeah, I work with Stratcom Africa, and we initiated the Ghana Garden and Flower Movement in 2013. Why did we do this? Because we saw the need to use communication as a tool to raise consciousness about the environment, sustainable living, healthy living, and clean living, as well as the wealth that could be generated from our flora and fauna, from gardening in general. We started with 14 exhibitors and 1,400 visitors. Last year, we had 140 exhibitors and over 21,000 visitors, which shows that people are listening, people are hearing, and people are beginning to act. And that is our interest in issues relating to the environment.
Thank you, Esther. And I'm very glad personally to see that the Ghana Garden and Flower Show has become such an anticipated event in the calendar of Accra. Next, Aula Sewa, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Right, my name is Awula Sewa. I'm a lawyer, I'm an activist, a Brent community champion, and I'm the founder and coordinator of Eco-Conscious Citizens, which is a group of individuals and organizations that at home and abroad working together for a cleaner, healthier, and greener environment. The group is currently campaigning against the construction of a multi-story office block on Parks and Gardens land, and the rezoning of the area from green civic to exclusively civic. We also support a number of campaigns, including the Itiwa Forest Reserve campaign, food sovereignty, the Sandema mahogany trees campaigns to protect them, the Cheado mangrove campaign. And in a nutshell, these are the campaigns we support, but we are always there to support campaigns that go to the heart of the environment.
Thank you, Aula Sewa, and it's wonderful to see, these coalitions and voices growing stronger, and in particular to see the emergence of an eco-conscious citizens group like yours. Namata, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
My name is Namata Sarumaga Musasi. My background is architecture, but I call myself a de-colonial space maker. The idea being that I want to explore the kinds of spaces we are creating, particularly in our urban areas, and find ways in which we can record these spaces, look at how the kinds of ecosystems we are creating, explore the ways in which we can make them more inclusive, and find ways of creating cities that better serve our needs today. With Mofra Foundation, I've participated in a number of projects where we have been creating the kinds of, looking at the ways in which we can sort of create, for example, playable spaces within market spaces in Accra, in Nima and Malata markets. We have also created a children's park with the Teshi Nungwa Residents Association in Teshi Nungwa Estates. And most recently, we we spent a year working on building a sort of database of the kinds of parks that we have in Accra. So we were exploring both the formal and the informal areas, looking at the kinds of spaces that we have created, the ones that are formed sort of informally and the ones that are formed within our development framework, looking at the state of them and looking at essentially exploring the sort of landscape of the city and how, in the hope that we can find a way to move forward in our creation of public spaces.
Thank you, Namata, and it's been wonderful working with you on these projects. And I personally have benefited a lot from your architect's eye. I'd like to round off the introductions by mentioning the Ghana Youth Environmental Movement and its founder, Perk Pomeye. Perk was supposed to join us in this session, but unfortunately was unable to do so due to a scheduling conflict. But his voice as a representative of the young people who form the majority of the population of Accra is very important. And I just want to re-articulate the GYEM's mission here, which is to bring together and empower young people from diverse backgrounds with the tools to run disruptive campaigns and lead solutions to the environmental changes of our time. So as our conversation develops, we hope to include some of those perspectives from people like Perk and his organization. So I think to begin with, we want to look at what we mean when we ask this question, is Accra a green city? We intentionally posed this question as a prompt for this conversation to indicate that inherent in that title is, a number of questions. So first of all, what do we mean by a green city? Whether or not Accra is green, depends on several perspectives. So Aula Sewa, can you tell us when we use the term green, what comes to mind? What do you include within that designation?
Several things come to mind. I mean, the obvious one is, do we have green spaces? Do we, what shall I say? Do we actually, when we are looking at building, do we pay attention to the regulations? Do we have well-marked open spaces and parks and so on and so forth? And I also look at noise pollution. I look at so many different things. We're looking at recycling. What's our level of recycling? I'm sad to say that the last time I checked, it's under 10%. If I remember correctly, it's about 3 or 4%. A green city cannot be one if your recycling levels are so low, we don't even segregate the rubbish. So there are so many different angles we can look at it from. And if you look at this image, you can see that a lot of it looks very sad, very sad. You can't, on the left side, you can't see much green. But green has to do with so many different things. And I'm sure the others will also have other things to say. But for my part, I would say that green has to do with being sustainable. And I think we can go on that road.
Indeed. So you have raised these important questions about regulations. What regulations do we have? What are the noise levels in the city, and do they actually constitute a form of pollution? What is our record on recycling? What, is the air pollution situation in the city like? The images that we've been showing on the screen as we talk are, giving rise in my mind to, whether or not Accra is a green city really could depend on where you live, where you work, how you get around the city, the resources at your disposal, whether you're visiting from elsewhere, and as you say, a host of other factors. Esther, perhaps you can jump in here and tell us what, comes to your mind when you consider this idea of green.
What comes to my mind is whether people have a green consciousness or green mentality, whether people see green as beneficial, because whether we have policies that make us do things in a sustainable manner, or willingness of people to build with sustainability in mind, or whether we're not cutting down trees, whether we're not building on spaces that have been reserved for parks and all that, depends on what benefit we see from these things. But when you speak to people, you get the sense that they actually don't know that green is beneficial. They don't know that green helps us to be sustainable. So green mentality, green consciousness, I think is a starting point. And I want to say that from the work that we've been doing, it would appear that that is actually missing or very low on people's consciousness level. And this has to be worked on to enable us to even build the other things that we want people to do in Ghana, in Accra, and the rest of the country.
Esther, you bring up this really important point of low consciousness. And I am just listening to you and connecting that to the low information environment. People apparently either don't know the consequences of their actions or don't know enough to modify those behaviors. So what you call low consciousness obviously translates directly into, such acts as, the cutting of trees and just poor civic behavior around the environment. Namata, what do you think?
I think a lot of it does come down to a sort of a poor consciousness, but I also think it's also a lack of a sense of ownership. In that a lot of the time, the way in which we treat some of your earlier images, when you were looking at the image of like Achimota Forest from overhead, or when you're looking at Ridge, it's sort of removed from the individual's sort of lived experience, right? When you looked at that one map where we were seeing to the left, there was a lot of sort of ungreen area, or like, it's a very sad looking space. It's very important for us to sort of try and always also sort of zoom in into the individual experience and understand the lived experience and look at the sense of, a lack of ownership that often comes with urban living. So while we do not necessarily have the consciousness in terms of maintaining green spaces, there's also the need to sort of place ourselves within the ecosystem. And we don't often enough do that. And we don't have the awareness of the fact that we exist within the ecosystem. And even when we do that, everyone has sort of formed their own little bubbles where they sort of understand what their own needs, their immediate needs are, but not understanding, for example, the fact that a park becomes the lungs of a city and impacts our overall experiences of the city and things like that. So I think a lot of it is about a bit of a lack of contextual understanding, but also a lack of ownership of the city and how we interact with it.
Thank you, Nam. I think that what the three of you have said mirrors what we've been showing in these images, which is looking at the city from, above, from way out there, almost at a macro level, where there's a satellite image, showing areas of green, areas that don't have green. But then when you zero right down into, you know, the level of the personal, right? People's lived lives on the ground, so to speak, in the city. I mean, all along that continuum, there are issues that can be raised. And what I would like to do now is to turn the conversation to drilling down a little bit more into these issues, both at the macro and personal level, by asking each of you to talk to us about what you and your organization do in response to a perceived issue in the city that needs addressing. And, you know, you may talk about, you know, what you do in general, but it would be very interesting to hear you also zero in on some particular projects that you've been involved in. So may we start on this with Aulasewa, if you can tell us what your recent, you know, activism has been about. What are the issues that have moved you to form this eco-conscious citizens, and what have you been doing?
Thank you. I mean, I've always been concerned about the environment. For about 30 years, I've had an environmental group where we've been looking at issues that affect residents and so on and so forth. But to zoom into eco-conscious citizens, it was my disappointment at the lack of leadership. Let's call a spade a spade. I found out that parks and gardens, if we go back to the early 1960s and realize that Kwame Nkrumah set up parks and gardens, and it became a ministry. You had the Ministry of Parks and Gardens under a cabinet minister to show the importance he placed on green spaces. And there was so much that Parks and Gardens was supposed to do as a department, as a ministry, take the leadership, green other areas, and educate, research on botany and all sorts of things. And then you find out that we've had the bright idea of felling 150 trees. 150 trees, very bright idea, and destroying over 5,000 plants in order to go and build a multi-story office block on Parks and Gardens land. So we said this is a no-no, it cannot happen. We chased it up even with the Environmental Protection Agency because you cannot just fell trees willy-nilly. You're supposed to have got permission. According to the EPA, no permission was sought. What did the EPA do about it? Your guess is as good as mine. So we started this campaign to protect parks and gardens, because I would say that if we talk about education, it's all about leadership. I was talking to somebody from New Zealand. You can't fell trees without permission. A Ghanaian was there, felled a tree. What do you think happened? The police were called. But I can just fell a tree and no action will be taken. So it's also about the authorities being serious enough to enforce regulations. So in a nutshell, we started this campaign because we thought it goes to the heart of greening. If Parks and Gardens itself, if we know why it was set up, we're allowing it to be turned into a concrete jungle, then we are missing something. And that's how we've been able, I wouldn't say to arrest the situation, but we've been able to stall. We've been able to stop them from putting up the building. But we need more and more people to join. I'm very pleased at the publicity we got, especially City TV, which actually did a program. We went to the studio, but they also came to Parks and Gardens to see for themselves. And so that's one of the major campaigns. But what we are also doing is, as both participants have said, we need to have the green consciousness, but it's a two-way street. The authorities are there for a reason. The local authorities are supposed to ensure that certain things are done. I can't get up today and just fell trees, but if they do nothing, then the citizens have to rise. But I can't really control it if somebody decides to fell all the trees around Gifford Road, getting to Burma Camp. The authorities need to act. So it's a difficult situation. So we're trying to let people see that trees are not weeds, because a lot of people think that trees and greenery are like weeds. As soon as we are ready to develop, which means put up concrete buildings, then we can get rid of them. So it's education. I'm very, very proud of Sister Esther and the work she's doing. I think it's phenomenal. I'm proud of everybody here. And I think together we will make a difference. But we need to get the authorities to do their work. Without that, it's going to be extremely challenging.
So, Awolasewa, you do bring up this matter of the gap between our regulatory environment, which very often looks wonderful on paper, and what actually happens on the ground, where these regulations are either ignored or outright contravened. Parks and Gardens is a wonderful place. I would go there myself. I knew it as a child, and I just thought it was Accra's secret park because nobody seemed to know about it. And you would go in there and find these wonderful old growth trees that, they seemed like they belonged in a Buri botanical garden, or something like that. There was a stream, and the only people there were the, people who work in parks and gardens, or those who were using it as a shortcut, between Switchback Road and 37. So I'm so glad that Eco-Conscious Citizens has taken up this fight, which is what it is. Thank you very much. I wonder if our other participants have anything to say about your activity around the Parks and Gardens matter.
I would like to say that that was a very good move by the Eco-Conscious group, Awolasewa and her group. Without leadership, we are not going to have this sustainability drive happen. And I am also happy that the coalition is facilitating, bringing all of us together, because when the citizens move, when we indicate that this is what we want, leadership should listen because they're leading us. And therefore, I am going to, with the Ghana Garden and Flower movement, what we are pushing is no different from what Awolasewa and her group are pushing. We will promote ownership of the situation so that we all join to get leadership to pay attention.
Thank you so much. That's really insightful. Namata.
I was just saying it's been really beautiful watching how Eco-Conscious Citizens has ensured that the matters of importance are remaining in the public eye. Now, when you look up Eco-Conscious Citizens or issues, find statements, and I think that's a big part of what needs to happen, because there are many of us who are aware and there are many of us who have been working on these issues, but it does need to remain in the public eye consistently, so it becomes part of our psyche, part of our thinking, part of that green mentality or that green consciousness that Esther mentioned. So that's one thing that I really admire in the work that you've been doing with Eco-Conscious Citizens, and I think it'll be a great part of also applying the pressure, again, like you were saying, applying the pressure on leadership. If they start seeing that, one, we are consistently making the same statements and making the same, sharing the same messages and consistently putting them, and then also seeing the public turning around and saying the same thing, they will have no option but to engage and start to reconsider how they are treating our cities as our custodians of our cities.
So listening to you, it's very interesting to see how consciousness is rising as this really, central idea in everything that all of you, are saying, not just in the citizenry, but at the leadership level. And I'd venture to say, also in the consciousness of corporate citizenship. So perhaps, Esther, this is a good segue to you to tell us what was your motivation for encouraging the Ghana Garden and Flower Show to become, an event in the city.
as a communications company, Stratcom Africa seeks to use communication as a tool or to show people that communication can be an important tool for generating change. I grew up in Secondary and Comenda largely. And in Comenda, there were spaces, green spaces for us to sit and relax under trees and all that. Nobody had to tell us not to put a building in a certain place because, I mean, we lived in a community where nature was part of us. But I moved to Accra and I see that a lot of people are looking to government and other authorities to take care of the environment for them. Also, when we talk about global warming, people see it as a global issue. And if it's talked about locally, people think that it is somebody else that would take care of it. So we decided to let people appreciate that different stakeholders have different responsibilities. So leadership or government, the state, have the responsibility of uh, providing regulations and policies that ensure that we live sustainably. But individuals also have a responsibility for their own little spaces. And then we realized when we did a little bit of research that people really didn't care and didn't know. So we thought, how do we get people to care? So we began to communicate the environment, environmental sustainability through healthy living, beautiful environment, and wealth creation and income generation. And people began to pay attention. Then we added creativity and art, and we got even more attention. So the Ghana Garden and Flower movement sought, first of all, to get uh, leaders or policymakers to pay attention to the environment, but we also thought that we should close the gap between the policymakers and the individual by getting individuals to understand the benefit that they get from doing gardens and flowers, living sustainably. And that is how we came up with the movement, because we thought that anybody and everybody could join. But every year we bring everybody together in a show where we can showcase our rich flora and fauna, garden art and all that, and use that platform to educate the public, generate intense awareness that many other programs can feed off of. So that is what made us do this. And it was a good corporate social responsibility activity to undertake. Now it's registered as a non-profit organization because we feel that other people have become interested and it can take a mind and a character of its own. Yeah.
I think it's a wonderful movement. And I just have a follow-up question. I'm curious to know, in between the garden and flower show itself, what does the movement do?
What the movement has been trying to do, we did that for a bit, was to get people to plant trees, do education in schools, and link the schools to some of the exhibitors so that some of the exhibitors can contribute plants to the schools and all that. One of the things that we've also established is Ghana Garden and Flower Clubs. And we've zoned Accra into 4, where people who are interested in gardens can come together. We've planned a number of things also, but Emily, it has taken a long time to get people to even listen to us, hear us, and act. So last year we said, look, now you agree with us that gardens and flowers are good. So you be the change. Now own it.
Right.
So what Nam was talking about, last year
Right.
we promoted ownership. So we have the programs outlined, including Jazz in the Garden on Friday evenings every quarter and all that. We have them planned, but we now needed to get people to own and change. And then this year, the show's theme is live the change. So now we are getting people to get involved in the programs that we have defined and designed, which will have to be taken up in between the shows. And thankfully now we have somebody that has provided a space for regular flower markets. And that
Oh,
is also going to happen. And we have been working with the Dutch embassy, who have given us access to retired Dutch experts who are working with floriculturists in Ghana to grow industry. Israeli embassy has also worked with us to establish a green innovation competition for the youth. Last year, the winner of that competition was flown to Israel, all expenses paid, to go and learn more about their area of innovation. And this year, we have it coming up again. It's a movement, and we encourage different people to link in with us to do many things in between the shows. So these are some of the things that happen in between the shows and will continue to grow as the show grows, the movement grows.
I certainly hope so. When I'm in Accra, that, Jazz in the Garden, I am going to be there. I think for those of you who may have missed a little bit of what Esther was just saying, she mentioned the Dutch embassy and the Israeli embassy as, two of the diplomatic missions that have been supporting her work. But Awla Sewa and Namata, could you just jump in here briefly and respond to what Esther's been telling us about the Ghana Garden and Flower movement?
There's just there's something that I heard about you doing as well, which was horticultural workshops, if I'm not mistaken. And I thought it's really a beautiful thing that you're creating a space not just where people sort of gain an appreciation for gardens and flowers, and they're not just realizing that it can become an income generating thing, but it's also so important that it's also empowering us to sort of actually do it ourselves. And I think maybe a part of that, again, goes back to the question of ownership, learning how we can actively be a part of creating these spaces, as opposed to the sort of tendency that we seem to have with certain things where we distance ourselves from the ability to sort of take part in certain kinds of activities and actually engage. And again, that speaks again to the sense of ownership. If you're able to create it, then you can have a sense of ownership over it. And if you are able to do that, then you're that much closer towards a sort of ideal goal of being able to say, well, this is our city and this is how we're creating it and this is how we shape it. So that's something I have an appreciation for.
Thank you, Namatab. The overall theme, of course, of this whole Conscious Cities Festival 2020 is to shape and be shaped. So I think this conversation is dovetailing very nicely with that idea. Awla Sewa, do you have some thoughts on this?
No, I'll just say that it's all, I think, very exciting. And I like the aspect about income generation, because whether we like it or not, we're in two Accras. There are those of us who some will say that we have the luxury of being able to appreciate greenery. And others will say that they are looking for food to eat, whilst we are talking about surroundings. But when you bring about the green economy and you show that you can have a win-win situation, you can make money out of the green environment. And at the same time, have beauty around us. A lot of us claim to be Christians, and we should ask ourselves, why did God put us in the Garden of Eden and not the Garden of Concrete? So if we really claim to be Christians, we should have an understanding of how important it is to be in green, beautiful surroundings. They allow us to think, and by thinking, we can move our country forward. So I think it's important that we try and get people to have ownership, but let people understand that actually you can make money out of the green economy. And I think that's all incredibly important. And I think, I think Sister Esther, you mentioned a while back about when you found unoccupied green spaces, sometimes you'd plant things there for people to see the transformation. So we did something similar. You know, we saw kind of an untidy spot and we planted a few things there. And it has beautified the surroundings. I wouldn't say that it has made people around have a sense of ownership yet, but you can see that in certain areas, people are beginning to sort of appreciate the fact that why should everywhere around us be ugly? Let's try and put a plant here or something and beautify our surrounding. So I think, yes, it's something that it's going to take time, but I think it will have a good impact. But we just need to continue to persevere, and we will get there.
So you mentioned things that are happening, literally on the ground, taking a space and transforming it and having people become conscious of that change. Namata, if we turn to you and the work that you've been doing as a very keen observer of spaces within the city, who has access to them, who has not, what our public spaces are like. So this business of actually documenting what is happening on the ground is a necessary step to doing something about it. So perhaps you can now tell us about the work that you've done in a project to evaluate, what we call park spaces in Ghana, as well as perhaps your own work and what you've learned.
Well, it's been a very sort of interesting process. I think maybe if I take a couple of steps back to a couple of years ago, when with Mofra Foundation, we were invited by Teshi Nungwa Residents Association to essentially recreate a children's park that they had in their neighborhood. The reason I bring that project up is because one, it was initiated by the community, and two, it was a space that had already existed as a park and was functioning as a park, but did not appear like, very park-like. So it was a park in a sense as a result of its function. You had people doing exercise there, you had children playing football there, you had people having religious gatherings there. So all sorts of things were happening in that space. And so when we were invited into that space, it gave us a great opportunity to sort of inject the green back into the space while appreciating and respecting the existing functions of that space. Now, fast forward a couple of years to this recording of the state of parks in Accra. One thing that we did as we began the project is we first decided that we actually needed to understand how you define a park in Accra. Because, you could look at it from the sense of, something like F4 Sutherland Park, which is a formal park in the city, part of the urban development framework and all of that. But that wouldn't capture the way in which we in Accra and in many places in Ghana engage public space. You have so many different spaces that would not necessarily have the label park, but carry so many of those functions. Some of them are sort of semi-formal, some of them are completely informal in the sort of westernized sense. You could look at areas like Jamestown, where you have so many community gathering spaces where all sorts of things happen. And this, even though these spaces are not green, they serve the function of a park because they bring people together. They serve as, little lungs within the city. You're able to come into these spaces and engage in a public space and relax and play sport and sort of engage. These spaces are opportunities for us to also say, why don't we inject a little bit of green in that? So in the process of recording the kinds of parks that we had in the city, again, we started by sort of trying to better be able to define the different kinds of parks. We have the formal parks, which were, Efwa Sutherland Park, Asante Park, and other parks like that. Something that we found very interesting in these spaces was the lack of access for the public. You have Efwa Sutherland Park, where you are unable on an average day to just walk in. When you do walk in, you will get chased by a security man who's saying, "What are you doing within this space?" So even when we do have these spaces that should be maintained and are not being maintained by the state, even when you have those spaces, access to those spaces is quite complicated. And so again, the conversation around ownership comes. How are people going to appreciate green spaces when the green spaces that we have, you are not allowed to access? And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have the ones that sort of arose out of need. By Accra girls, for example, on the highway going to 37 from Achimota, you have this football pitch that is only defined by, the rocks and a couple of sticks of metal that tell you that these are goalposts. But it also depends on what time you go there, because at let's say at noon, you'll find some elderly Muslim people reading the Quran. At different times of day, you will find different functions. And so that space is functioning better in terms of accessibility, and it gives people the sort of room to sort of engage a green space and breathe and be free. But we also know how these things operate. Once you try to sort of formalize it, suddenly access will become a problem. This is something that happened with the Teshi Nungwa Children's Park that we renovated. Once we had done it, the MP, who's also the Deputy Minister of Health, Honorable Okoboy, came and fenced the park, and now the community cannot access it. You see, so it's very interesting the sort of relationship we have with these spaces. Once you sort of try to formalize it and say this is a green space for the city, then suddenly the people are unable to access it. And so then you find that in order for people to be able to sort of appreciate a lot of our public spaces, what you are finding is that a lot of them tend to be the more private ones. So you have places like Legon Botanical Gardens, which is very beautiful, but you have to pay to get in. Not everyone is going to be able to afford to pay to get in, or is going to prioritize going into a space like that. Because again, we have not sort of fostered a green consciousness. Then you have other spaces like football pitches by schools and things like that. Now those spaces are free access, but unfortunately, the maintenance of those spaces is quite complex in that, they may not have the means to be able to maintain these spaces. So you have a lot of littering, you have a lot of, different things like that. This image that we're looking at just now, to interrupt myself, on the left, you're looking at Asante Park, which is on the way to Osu Castle. And the reason this image is very important to me is because it captures so much of the problem that we are facing in terms of accessibility and ownership of green spaces within our cities. This is the image on the left. If you look, there's a low sort of fence with some chain link fences on the left, and on the right, there are some kids playing football on the street. Now, the day that we went there, we were allowed to walk in and sort of have a look around and all that kind of thing, but a couple of these kids also tried to walk in, and they were chased out by the security who maintained the space. And mind you, the maintenance of the space is nothing to write home about. They're not actually doing a stellar job, if I can put it like that, of maintaining the space. But then the people who are supposed to be able to occupy these spaces are now not allowed to. How are they supposed to develop a green consciousness if they are not allowed to access the spaces in which that green is being built? So that's something that we're really sort of observing in this. And the point of recording all of this is because there is such a wide spectrum of public space and parks in this city. You have from the spaces, even sometimes a space that is a parking space during the day on a Saturday morning may become a funeral ground. Once it becomes a communal space, does it take on a different identity? What is that space? And what are the opportunities? How do we plug into that space in such a way that the people are able to then say, I can take ownership of this space, and I can also develop a green sensitivity around a space such as this. So you find spaces like that, and then again, you find spaces like Efwa Sutherland Park. You find the school grounds, which are often rented out on weekends and things like that. there's so many different types of parks. And then once you also look at these spaces, then again, the functionality changes around. So you have spaces that are used as sort of mini markets. You have spaces where people go to play their sports. And, these are the ones that have a bit more life in them, but they're not necessarily always the greenest spaces. So it's an interesting sort of relationship that we are forming, because then also when you go into people's private yards, you see that people are cutting down all their trees and then tiling the entire compound. So that's not necessarily also just restricted to class either. So once we started looking at all of these parks and sort of trying to sort of create loose classifications in the understanding that this has to be quite an organic process, because not every space is exactly the same. Once we started doing that, we started looking at things like accessibility, as I've mentioned. How easy is it for you to enter the space? How difficult is it? Are there people maintaining the space? Is that related to the accessibility? That kind of thing. Looking at the green coverage, you would be surprised to find that the green spaces are not always the ones that are being maintained by the state. Sometimes it just happened to be, a patch that, like the Accra Girls space that has been undisturbed as yet. And then you have other things that you look at would be, for example, security, or looking at the age groups, the age groups that are utilizing the spaces. These are things that are really important for us to capture, because we can't just sort of go and impose an understanding of green living on people. We also have to sort of look at different lives, slot into those spaces, and understand the different functions that they're taking, and seeing how we can then immerse ourselves in that experience, and then sort of bring the appreciation of the green into those spaces, so that it becomes more of an enhancement as opposed to a disruption of the functions that they are currently serving. So the idea being that once we are able to identify these spaces, and then once we are able to look at their functions, look at the kind of demographics you're dealing with and all of these things, or even in terms of accessibility, like how far is this from your average home? You look at Nationalism Park in downtown Accra, right next to Black Star Gate. That space is very open, very accessible, but in terms of proximity to people's homes, how accessible does it really become? But then you find a lot of people sleeping there on the break from work. So we have to have a greater understanding of how we are currently functioning as a society before we then start to inject sort of concepts of how we can green these spaces, and get the people to take ownership of that process of greening our consciousness. So in doing this, the idea is that we're compiling all of this information. It also helps so that the idea is that it's open access. Everyone else who's got an interest in this should be able to look at this and have an understanding of the different ways in which we form public spaces, the kind of green understanding we have of these spaces, how the communities around those spaces are operating. And then once we have that understanding of that, then we can start to say, well, how about this as an intervention? How can we work with these communities to then start creating this green consciousness, making sure that it extends beyond us as the activists? Because what we are doing is obviously very important, but the public has to buy in, And so once we have this information, we can then start translating it into different sort of formats. People can start reading into this and saying, okay, fine, this is how it worked in a neighborhood that's like mine. And this is, what they've done. Let me lift something and see how that works in my community. And then not all the work is left to the activists. Everyone becomes a sort of activist, taking ownership and appreciating and seeing the ways in which we can then make our little corner that little bit much more greener, a little bit more beautiful. An example of how you could do that, and I know I'm going on, but this is very exciting for us, was a few weeks ago, we had Parking Day. Parking Day was a concept initiated by a group called Rebar in the US. And the idea is that you take a piece of urban real estate that would usually be paid for, i.e. a parking spot, and you temporarily change it into a park, just so that people have a day to sort of immerse themselves in that sort of feeling of green. And it was very interesting because in the engagement with the public, we did this in 3 locations in the city, very busy locations, 37 outside a major trotro station. We had one at Abelempe traffic light, which is also a very busy area. And then we had one inside Abelempe near the trotro station, which is sort of more nestled in the community. And the point was to sort of create, we went around the communities, we spoke to people, and we said, you know, would you mind if we set up just for the day a little green space for you to come and engage in and see how you feel about it? And the conversations that were had with the public were really interesting. People were saying that they want spaces like this. But again, I think it comes back down to the sort of idea of ownership. If you are not able to access the spaces in which this is happening, then you may not necessarily know that you are able to create the space in your own spaces. So in doing this and engaging with people from across the spectrum, you had academics, you had street vendors, you had people from across the board, school children, as you can see in the bottom left image, people just coming and spending a little bit of time, allowing themselves a moment to be in these little mini green lungs that we created in the city for 6 hours. It was really important for people, for us to hear how the people responded to that. And so, like Awolasewa was saying earlier on, there is hope. It's a slow process, but people had an appreciation for it and people were speaking about how necessary it is. So it really, I think on many levels, the process of recording will help us to sort of identify the different ways in which we can plug into the existing ecosystems. And in that way, encourage the public to take ownership of projects like this and find their own ways of greening spaces in a manner that serves them.
There's a great deal of food for thought here, Namata. Thank you so much for that report. I must say that the final report of the parks evaluation process that you undertook is excellent. It would be it would be possible to share it with anybody, and we're hoping to be able to extract from it, you know, shorter pieces that are more digestible that can just help to inform people and inform policy, which Esther has, you know, mentioned to us is such an important thing. You've raised many issues, and perhaps we can just have a conversation about that before I quickly introduce a few of the elements of Mopra Park. But Esther, what do you make of what Nam has shared with us?
It's right on point. You have to understand people's existence to facilitate ownership among them. And so one of the things that we've gradually been doing over the 8 years is to speak the language of the community. We even started visiting chiefs in Accra to speak to them about, some of them expressed interest, came to the show, were really pleased and invited us over. And we spoke to them about, not about coming to establish anything in their space, but to engage the young people, the community, and think together with them about what can be done. One of the people on our advisory board, Arafua Enning, is part of a program that is being undertaken in the Jamestown area in relation to environmental conservation. And she tried to get us involved gradually. Then we also went to Nima, where there is a community garden, where gardens in very congested spaces are beautifully done on roofs and all that. And we projected these through the media and through the show as well, so that people can appreciate that you don't have to live in cantonments or East Legon or places with a lot of space to be able to have a garden. So I really want to re-emphasize what Nam said, that it is important to understand the reality of the communities to be able to make green living, it's not even about making it attractive to them. They have to see the benefit in them. So I really agree with that. But I also want to say that with voices like Eco-Conscious group, Abula Sewa's group, you know, speaking with urgency about certain situations, we are able to have different voices come together. And now with a study on the parks or the urban, what do you call it? Urban green spaces and all that, I am so excited. I remember the day the parking day was done and I couldn't find the location. I was really frustrated because I really wanted to be a part of it. And I think that those are things that are good, because when people see, when people experience, then they can believe and they can see what you are talking about. So yes, I'm really happy that this study is being done. It is a study that I hope can be written, the report can be written in a manner that busy executives can read quickly and take nuggets out of and act on, because in this country, a lot of reports end up on shelves, especially if they are not things that people see as immediately beneficial to them, and also broken down in ways that communities can consume. So the communities that have been, in whose areas, in whose spaces, some of the parks have been identified and written about, I hope and pray that they can get to know about what the study said so that they can now own what can be done to their benefit. I'm really excited about the work that is being done. And hey, we're on board.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I'm just looking at us coming up against the clock here. And so I would love to, what I'd like to ask you and all the other panelists to do is think about your closing remarks. You know, what more can we do? You know, what are some other insights that you would like to very quickly touch on as a way of closing out this really inspiring and interesting session? But before that, I would like to take off my moderator hat and become a participant and just share some information through the images that we will show about Mofra Place Park in Jolu. So Mofra Place Park is about a 1 to 1.5 acre space, which is on private land, but which is under the stewardship of Mofra Foundation. And Mofra Place Park is intended to be, you know, a democratizing space. It's for people of all backgrounds to be able to come and enjoy green space. This particular slide here is showing you some of the principles of the park at work, which are that when trees are cut down in Accra, and you know, mahogany, neem, these old 80, 100, 120-year-old trees, we have salvaged wood from around the city, and we bring them into Mofra Place Park and we repurpose them and create features and play items out of them. You know, we'll look at a log and out of it we'll be able to fashion a bench, you know, working with local carvers. So we've used wood a great deal in that environment, and in the process we've learned what the challenges are with using wood. Wood is in plentiful supply, but you have to look after it because, you know, our climate and termites and so on, you know, can act against them. So we've created giant owari, you know, we have climbing structures, we have benches, we use wood, you know, for teaching, you know, mathematics and other sort of, you know, preschool concepts to children. We've also made sure that that is a beautiful environment as far as our resources have been able to take us. We have, interesting plants, and we want children to come in there and to be inspired. There are some mature trees, we make sure that whatever structures that we create there are, have multi-functions built into them. So, they're not only functional, but there's an aesthetic to them and there's a teachability to them, so this is where children, nature, and culture truly connect in the city. I want to put a plug out here to Esther, because I have been thinking about this for a long time. Where is it possible for the garden and flower movement, to somehow collaborate so that we can even have, plants in this children's park that are from the garden of so-and-so, from the garden of so-and-so, and there is information about the plants and trees there in 2 or 3 Ghanaian languages as well, as in English. So for a space in Accra that is not just a park, it is a green laboratory, it is an outdoor classroom, it is a learning space, it is available to people of all backgrounds. And one of those images showed mothers of children with disability who we bring into the park. And we've tried to create swings that can accommodate, children with disability, and the mothers themselves put down that burden for 4 hours and, have a time when they are out there doing their, dance exercise class. This does not happen anywhere else in the city, so it's a very special place where there is innovation, thinking, and doing around children. And we really invite the whole community. Eco-conscious citizens, you have a meeting, come there and use this space. Let's make sure that we can sustain it, because without your use and support, it will not be able to be sustained. But it's a very unique space, and we are proud to be associated with it. And we invite you all to join us to make it a destination in the city, not just for children, but for families and other people as well. So that's sort of my elevator speech short version about Mofra Place. It's just off the Abelempe traffic light next to a place called Marvels. And so that's easy to find. So we only have a few minutes left. And so I just like to round up by asking everybody to, say something, whether it is by way of, a wish list or something you hope to do in the future or hope to see in the future around Accra. Let's end on an aspirational note. For myself, when I'm driving around the city and I see sometimes there's a tree, it might be next to, a workshop or, a fitter's shop, something like that, but there's actually one tree that's been left there that people are sitting under. And to me, that is actually a symbol of hope. So Aula Sewa, can we go from you to Nam and then to Esther to round up the session?
Yeah, I'll quickly say that to respond to what Nabate said, access to the parks are very, very important. And it's true that apart from the brilliant job Kofi Yadomboache has done at Legon Botanical Gardens, and of course yours as well, gardens seem to be a place where it's just, you don't expect the public to be actually going there and accessing it. And that's a very important point. You look at parks and gardens, we try to get people to go there. And as you said, they are the lungs. When the last tree dies, we all die. And instead of going to the mall and things like that, get the habit of going to parks. But then access is important. You have the paid ones, but those that you don't pay, like parks and gardens, they virtually expect you to sort of have an appointment before you go there. So we're trying to change the culture. So it's all about education, education, education. But what about things we want to see? We want to see what is going on. I was so excited about the park event you did, transforming places into parks. It shows us that there's hope, we can do things. But I would like to end by saying that in order to continue the discussion, we do have monthly education sessions where we discuss different things. It could be GM products. And in fact, on the 29th of October, we do have something discussing whether or not we should be concerned about GM seeds. It's all part of the same thread about the green environment. What are we putting into our systems? Is it going to help us survive, or is it going to give us cancer or other things that are going on? So on a positive note, we are doing very well. We need to just keep up the good work and keep educating ourselves and raising awareness, which I think is extremely important.
Thank you so much. Namata, so Parking Day was not so long ago. Do you expect that to continue? You know, what are you hopeful about?
Well, personally, I've been very hopeful in my research in discovering how many people take the making of green spaces and the preservation of green so seriously. So for me, that's where the hope began, the understanding that there's so many people with whom we can work to do this. I think if we're able to sort of amplify each other's efforts, and look at our strengths and see, you know, where to hit when, we are going to move further in greater leaps and bounds. With the Parking Day, yes, it would be nice for something like that to become regular. We are looking at that. Like I said at the beginning, the consistency is what, you know, starts to help us get somewhere. Looking at the garden flower show and how it's been happening for all these years, looking at the constant presence of eco-conscious citizens, comments in the media. These are the things that are taking us places because it's becoming a part of our psyche as the people of Accra and beyond. So for me, that's where a lot of the hope is. And so on our part, I think that's where we also have to be consistent. So as we record the spaces, we also have to ensure that we are, you know, forever applying pressure where necessary, whether it's with the policymakers, whether it's having these Parking Day events so that the public is constantly being reminded of the beauty and the need for these lungs in our city. I think those are the things that it's not as difficult, I think, once we can get into our sort of collective psyche. I think it's not as difficult as it may sometimes seem. So there's a lot of hope and I'm excited. We can turn it around. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Esther, you have the last word.
Thank you. I want to assure you that your request is done to have the plants it will be done. And we actually, as part of the Ghana Garden and Flower Show, we were doing green lessons for children. You handle children already. We have some of the resource persons. We'll get together with your team and see what is possible over time. I am really excited, and I think that the next step for us in this discussion is to look strategically at how we weave all the things that we're doing together so that there are no gaps. Parking Day was just a few weeks away, and I kept on feeling this is close, very close to Ghana Garden and Flower Show. Ghana Garden and Flower Show is from 4th November to 8th November. It's virtual. And I invite us to put some pictures from Parking Day on there. I will ask what we will need to connect on various things and make sure that we are getting things done back to back with each other so that we create the orchestration that is required. I'm also happy to inform you that we have connected with Nigeria, we have connected with Kenya, and we're looking at connecting Africa through green living. And so with what we are doing here, I think that we will have a good voice to put out there with our brothers and sisters in Nigeria and Kenya. So I am hopeful. But everything that I've heard today, I'm even more excited. Let's strategize and work together to put the lessons out not only to the people, but to policymakers and leaders as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Esther. I'm very glad that there is this outreach to other African countries, which is an aspect of Conscious Accra as the first African chapter. The statement I would make to round this off is that strategic coalitions are really necessary for us to translate what we're doing from a low consciousness environment to a high consciousness environment for the benefit of Accra. Thank you all so much for this wonderful session. And we hope that you will be able to listen to the other Conscious Accra sessions when they come on in a few days. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much
for organizing it. Much appreciated.